Everyone in town knew the name Mr. Adrian Cole. He was young, handsome, and one of the richest men in the city. People said everything he touched turned into gold. He owned hotels, restaurants, and big office buildings that shined under the sun like mirrors. From the outside, his life looked perfect: cars, fame, luxury, and power. But what no one knew was that deep inside Adrian's heart lived a silence darker than night. His only son, Ethan Cole, had been born deaf. The day Ethan came into the world, his cries never filled the hospital room. Doctors whispered to each other. Nurses looked down, and Adrian's joy turned to fear. His wife, Clara, lay weak on the hospital bed, smiling faintly at the small baby in her arms. "He's beautiful," she said softly, not knowing that her voice was one he would never hear. Hours later, tragedy struck. Clara's heart failed and she passed away, leaving Adrian alone with a newborn son who could not hear a single sound. For years, Adrian carried that pain like a secret wound. He blamed himself every day. He had been the one who wanted more money, more work, more deals, always away from home. If he had stayed, maybe things would be different. But life doesn't offer second chances. After his wife's death, Adrian buried himself in business, using work to cover his loneliness. His mansion stood tall and shining, but inside it there was no laughter, no music, no warmth, only quiet footsteps and the ticking of clocks. Ethan grew up surrounded by every luxury, expensive toys, private doctors and special tutors, yet he lived in complete silence. No one could reach him. Tutors came and went. Some stayed for a month, others for a week, but none could teach him. The boy never smiled, never looked into anyone's eyes. It was as if his heart had built a wall too high for anyone to climb. Servants whispered that the mansion felt cursed. Some even said they could hear the late Mrs. Cole crying at night. But Adrian didn't believe in ghosts. He only believed in results. And so he kept hiring more professionals, the best speech therapists, the best teachers, throwing money at a problem that love alone could have solved. Years passed. Ethan turned 7, then 8. Adrian tried to be a father, but each time he looked at his son's silent face, guilt filled his chest. He would try to talk, but when Ethan didn't respond, anger took over. Sometimes he shouted, "Why won't you listen?" forgetting that the boy couldn't hear. And when Ethan's eyes filled with tears, Adrian would turn away, hating himself even more. Then one morning, after yet another tutor quit, Adrian's personal assistant entered the study holding a paper. "Sir, there's a woman here for the nanny job," he said. "Her name is Maria." Adrian didn't even look up from his laptop. "Hire her if she's decent," he replied coldly. "I don't have time for interviews." And just like that, Maria Santos stepped into the Cole mansion, a simple woman with kind eyes and worn-out shoes. She came from a poor part of the city, carrying a small bag and big hopes. She had no idea that this job would change her life forever. The first time Maria saw Ethan, he was sitting by the window staring at the garden outside. His small hands played with a wooden toy, but his eyes looked empty, like the sky before a storm. She walked up slowly and smiled, but he didn't even glance at her. Still, Maria didn't give up. She sat beside him quietly and started to draw something on a small paper. It was a funny face, round eyes, a big mouth, and silly hair. Then she made another drawing, this time of Ethan with his toy. She laughed softly, hoping he would notice. Ethan turned his head just a little. His eyes met hers for the first time. She lifted the drawing and pointed to him, then to the paper. Slowly he reached out and touched it. A small smile appeared on his lips, tiny but real. That was the first time anyone had seen Ethan smile in months. Maria's way was simple. No fancy techniques, no books, no commands. She spoke through actions, expressions, and patience. Every morning she would sit beside him, showing him shapes, colors, and hand signs. When he learned something, she would clap silently and he would giggle, covering his mouth. Days turned into weeks. The servants began to whisper again, but this time not about sadness. "The boy is changing," they said. He smiles now. He runs around. Even the cold hallways of the mansion felt different, as if someone had opened the windows after years of darkness. Adrian, however, was too busy to notice. He traveled often, closing deals, hosting parties, living the life of a businessman admired by everyone, except the one person who mattered most. Sometimes when he came home, he would see Maria and Ethan in the garden. the boy laughing silently as Maria made faces or waved her hands like a magician. Adrian would pause for a moment, watching them from a distance, then shake his head and walk away. He told himself it was nothing, just another nanny who would eventually leave like all the others. But deep down, something about Maria felt different. There was a calmness in her eyes, a kind of strength that couldn't be bought with money. She didn't act afraid of him, nor did she try to impress him. She simply did her work, cared for the boy and smiled even when no one noticed. And then, one rainy evening, something happened that Adrian couldn't ignore. He returned home early from a meeting and was about to climb the stairs when he heard a faint sound. Not music, not laughter, but something soft and rhythmic coming from Ethan's room. He stopped, confused. For years that room had been silent. Slowly he walked closer and looked through the half-open door. What he saw made his breath stop. Maria sat on the floor with Ethan, both surrounded by colorful cards and drawings. Ethan was moving his hands in the air and forming signs, and Maria responded, smiling proudly. The boy's eyes sparkled with joy. He was communicating, alive, free. Adrian's heart raced. For the first time in years, he felt something breaking inside, the wall he had built between himself and his son. But he didn't step inside. He stood there quietly, watching, realizing that maybe the poorest woman in his mansion had given his son something no amount of money ever could: hope. And what Adrian didn't know was that Maria carried her own secret, one that would soon shake his world in ways he never imagined. The next morning, the Cole mansion woke to soft sunshine spreading through tall glass windows. The air felt lighter than usual, as if someone had whispered a prayer in the night. In the kitchen, the maids were already gossiping in low voices. "Did you see the boy yesterday?" one asked. "He was smiling." Another replied, "It's that new nanny. She's not like the others." Maria was in the garden helping Ethan water the flowers. She handed him the small watering can and pointed toward the roses. Ethan nodded shyly, his little hands gripping the can. He poured water too fast, splashing his own shoes, and Maria laughed, a soft, musical laugh that seemed to wake the morning birds. Ethan froze for a second, watching her face, then laughed silently too, his shoulders shaking with joy. That simple moment meant everything. For a boy who had lived in silence, laughter was a miracle. For Maria, it was hope, the kind she hadn't felt in years. Every day after that, Maria created small lessons disguised as games. She made cards with pictures, a sun, a house, a bird, and taught Ethan simple signs for each one. He learned fast, faster than anyone expected. His memory was sharp and his curiosity endless. When he wanted to know something, he would point and look at her with wide, eager eyes. Maria understood him in ways words could never explain. She knew when he was sad, when he was angry, and when he was proud, and in return Ethan trusted her completely. One afternoon, as they sat under the big oak tree near the garden, Maria showed him how to sign the word Mama. She didn't plan to, but it slipped out naturally. Ethan paused, his face turning serious. He stared at her hands, then made the sign slowly, uncertain, almost afraid. Tears welled in his eyes. Maria gently placed her hand over his. "It's okay," she whispered, even though she knew he couldn't hear. "She's watching you." Ethan blinked and smiled weakly. Then he took the paper and drew a small stick figure of a woman holding a baby. When he handed it to Maria, she couldn't hold back her tears. For the first time since she entered the mansion, Maria felt something deeper than duty. She wasn't just caring for a child, she was healing a broken soul. Inside the house, Adrian had noticed subtle changes. The servants talked less about sadness and more about progress. Ethan no longer sat in corners or avoided people. He walked around, touching things, observing faces, sometimes even giggling silently when Maria made funny expressions. But Adrian still couldn't bring himself to talk to Maria directly. He watched from afar, too proud to admit that a poor woman could succeed where doctors and teachers had failed. He told himself it was just coincidence, a phase that wouldn't last. One evening, Adrian returned home early again. It was raining outside, thunder rolling across the sky. As he entered the hall, he saw Ethan and Maria sitting on the floor near the fireplace, surrounded by blocks and drawings. Ethan was signing quickly with his small hands, and Maria nodded with a smile, responding gracefully. Adrian didn't understand their signs, but he could feel the warmth between them. Without thinking, he took a few steps closer. The boy turned and saw his father. His smile faded instantly. He froze, then lowered his hands. Adrian stopped too. For a moment the silence returned, heavy and painful. Maria looked up and saw the awkwardness. She stood slowly and signed to Ethan, encouraging him to show his father what he had learned. Ethan hesitated, then looked at Adrian again. He raised his hands and made a sign. Adrian frowned, confused. Maria smiled softly. He said, "Papa," she explained. The room went still. Adrian felt something catch in his throat. His own son, the child he thought could never call him anything, had just signed Papa. He wanted to say something, but words failed. He only nodded, blinking away tears he refused to let fall. "Good," he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. "Good job, Ethan." Ethan smiled again, small but proud. He picked up one of his drawings and handed it to his father. It was a picture of 3 people, a man, a woman, and a boy, holding hands. Adrian stared at it for a long time. The woman in the drawing had long hair like Maria's. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, staring at the fire. Memories of his late wife Clara filled his mind, her gentle smile, her soft voice, the way she used to sing to the baby. He remembered how the house used to be full of warmth, and how it turned cold after she was gone. Now, years later, that same warmth was back, brought not by wealth, not by success, but by a poor nanny with nothing to her name except kindness. Still, Adrian didn't know what to make of her. Who was this woman who could change his son's life in just a few weeks? Why did she look at Ethan with such understanding, almost as if she carried pain of her own? The next morning, Adrian asked his assistant to bring him Maria's file again. He glanced through it, her age, her address, her previous jobs. She had worked for families, cared for sick children, and volunteered at a small community school. Everything looked normal, and yet something about her name, Maria Santos, felt familiar. He shook his head and closed the file. Maybe he was just overthinking. Meanwhile, Maria continued her lessons with Ethan. She had created a new game using colors and shapes. Each time Ethan got a sign right, she rewarded him with a small paper star. By the end of the day, his little hands and shirt were covered in stars, and he beamed with pride. That evening, as she was leaving the room, Ethan tugged her sleeve. He pointed at her and signed something new, something she hadn't taught him yet. She frowned, unsure, then realized what it meant. "Thank you." Her heart melted. She knelt down and hugged him tightly. For the first time since she lost everything years ago, Maria felt that her life had meaning again. As the days went by, the mansion that once echoed with silence began to fill with a strange kind of music. Not sound, but joy. Ethan's laughter, though silent, was louder than any words. And though Adrian didn't know it yet, the boy's healing was only the beginning. The truth about Maria's past, and why she had really come to the Cole mansion, was still waiting in the shadows, ready to change everything. The Cole mansion had never felt so alive. Every morning began with laughter, not the kind that made sound, but the kind you could feel in the heart. Ethan's world was growing, filled with signs, drawings, and silent joy. The boy who once hid behind doors now ran through the hallways, waving his hands in excitement, calling for Maria in his own special way. The servants watched with smiles, whispering that the boy had been reborn. Maria had become more than a nanny. She was a light that touched everyone in the house. Her gentle ways calmed even the coldest hearts. When she entered a room, it felt warmer, as if she carried sunshine with her. But behind her kind eyes she hid something, a secret she never wanted anyone to know. Each evening after putting Ethan to bed, Maria sat by the window in her small room. She took out a folded photograph from her old purse. It was worn, the corners torn, but she couldn't throw it away. The photo showed a young man smiling proudly in a factory uniform. Beside him was a much younger Maria. Her eyes shimmered with hope. The man in the photo was her older brother, Daniel Santos. Years ago, Daniel had worked for one of Adrian Cole's companies, a factory that built furniture for his hotels. Daniel was hard-working, honest, and kind. But one day a terrible accident happened. A piece of heavy machinery broke down, injuring another worker. The blame fell on Daniel, even though he wasn't responsible. The company fired him without listening to his side, and when he tried to fight back, Adrian's lawyers crushed his case. Daniel lost his job, his reputation, and his hope. He struggled for months trying to provide for his family. Eventually, he fell sick. The medicine was too expensive, and one night he never woke up again. Maria remembered that night like it was yesterday. The sound of rain outside, her mother crying, and the hunger that followed. For a long time she hated the name Adrian Cole. To her, he was the reason her brother died and her family fell apart. But when she grew older, she learned about Ethan, the deaf boy whose mother had died, leaving him alone with a father too busy to care. Something inside Maria changed. She didn't feel anger anymore. She felt pity. She realized that pain didn't belong to one person. It spread like fire, touching everyone in its path. So when she saw the job opening for a nanny at the Cole mansion, she took it. Not for revenge, but for understanding. She wanted to see the man behind the name, the man she had hated all these years. She wanted to know if he was truly the monster she imagined, or just another broken soul trying to hide from life. And now, weeks later, she had her answer. Adrian wasn't cruel. He was lost. A man surrounded by gold, but starved of love. Maria's thoughts returned to the present as she heard soft footsteps behind her. Ethan was standing at her door, holding his teddy bear. His small eyes looked sleepy but worried. Maria smiled gently. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. Even though he couldn't hear, she motioned for him to come closer. He climbed onto her lap, curling up against her chest. She hugged him tightly and whispered, "It's okay, little one. You're safe." He soon fell asleep, breathing softly. Maria looked out the window again. The night sky was full of stars. For the first time in years, she felt peace, but she also felt fear. She knew secrets never stayed hidden forever. The next morning, Adrian walked into the dining room and saw Ethan feeding a piece of toast to Maria, giggling silently. The sight made him stop in his tracks. For a moment, he almost smiled, but pride kept his face stiff. "You've done well with him," he said finally. His tone was distant but softer than usual. Maria nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir." "He's a very bright boy," Adrian hesitated. He wanted to ask how she had done it, how she reached Ethan when no one else could, but his ego wouldn't let him. Instead, he changed the subject. "Do you need anything for his lessons? Equipment, materials, anything?" Maria shook her head. "No, sir. All he needs is time and patience." Her answer surprised him. Most people asked for money, better tools, or help. But she only wanted time, something Adrian rarely gave anyone. Later that day, Adrian watched from his office window as Maria and Ethan played in the garden. He saw how gently she guided his son's hands, how patiently she waited when he made mistakes, and how proudly she smiled when he got it right. Something inside Adrian softened. He remembered his wife, Clara, and how she used to tell him, "Love isn't something you buy. It's something you give." He had ignored those words, chasing success instead of happiness. Now, watching Maria and Ethan, he finally understood what Clara meant. That evening, he called his lawyer. "Find out everything about the woman working in my house," he said. "Maria Santos," the lawyer hesitated. "Any particular reason, sir?" Adrian's eyes narrowed. "No reason. I just like to know the people around my son." But the truth was, Adrian was curious and maybe even afraid. Something about her calmness, her kindness, her quiet strength. It all felt too perfect, too familiar. While Adrian waited for answers, Maria continued her work as if nothing was wrong. She taught Ethan how to express emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, love, through signs and drawings. She showed him that even silence could speak if the heart wanted to. One day she gave him a mirror and signed, "You are perfect." Ethan looked confused at first, then smiled at his reflection. Maria felt tears rise in her eyes. That one moment made all her struggles worth it. But that night, when she returned to her room, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her name, her address, and the words, "Mr. Cole wants to see you in his office tomorrow morning." Her hands trembled. She had known this day would come. She looked at the photo of her brother again and whispered, "Daniel, give me strength, because tomorrow she would have to face the man who destroyed her family, the same man whose son now called her Mama with his hands, and she had no idea whether the truth would set her free or destroy everything she had built. The next morning came with heavy clouds hanging over the Cole mansion. The air was still, almost nervous, as if the walls themselves knew something was about to change. Maria woke early, her heart already racing. She dressed neatly and brushed her hair, though her hands trembled the whole time. She had faced pain before, hunger, loss, loneliness, but this was different. This time she was afraid of losing the small piece of happiness she had finally found. Ethan was still asleep when she gently touched his forehead. "Be good today," she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. "I'll be back soon." She left him a small note with a drawing of a smiling sun, hoping it would comfort him while she was gone. Downstairs, the house was quiet. A maid guided her toward Adrian's office. Maria's footsteps echoed against the marble floor, her palms sweating. The large wooden door stood half open. Inside, Adrian sat behind his desk, the morning light falling across his face. He didn't look angry, just serious, unreadable. "Come in, Miss Santos," he said. His tone was calm, but something in his voice felt heavier than usual. Maria stepped inside and stood still, her hands clasped. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Yes, please, sit." She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the chair. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Adrian spoke again. "I had your background checked." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She kept her face steady, but her fingers gripped her dress tightly under the table. "You've worked for several families," he continued, glancing at the paper in front of him. "You also volunteered at a local community center. That's admirable." "Thank you, sir," Maria said quietly. Adrian looked up from the papers. His eyes were sharp, searching. "Tell me something, Maria. Why did you take this job? You're clearly educated and capable. You could have worked anywhere. Why my son?" Maria's throat tightened. The truth burned inside her, but she wasn't ready to let it out. Not yet. "I needed the work," she said softly. "And I love children." Adrian studied her face. There was something sincere in her eyes, something pure that made him believe her, but at the same time he felt she was hiding something. He sighed and stood up, walking toward the window. He spoke without turning around. "You've done something no one else could. You've brought life back into this house." Ethan smiles now. He talks through signs. "I can't thank you enough for that." Maria's chest filled with emotion. "He's a wonderful boy," she said. "He just needed someone to listen to his silence." Adrian turned to her then, his expression softer. "You're different from anyone I've ever hired. You care about him like he's your own." Maria looked down, afraid her eyes might reveal too much. "He feels like my own, sir," she whispered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain began tapping gently on the window, filling the silence with a soft rhythm. Adrian finally said, "You can go now." "I just wanted to talk." Maria stood, her knees weak. As she reached the door, Adrian added quietly, "Maria." "Thank you." She turned, surprised. He looked sincere, almost vulnerable. For the first time, she saw not a powerful businessman, but a lonely father, a man who was slowly learning to feel again. When she left the office, Adrian sat down heavily in his chair. He rubbed his temples, his mind full of questions he couldn't answer. Something about Maria's calmness reminded him of someone from long ago. He couldn't place it, but the name Santos still echoed in his head. That afternoon, Ethan ran into his father's office, his face glowing with excitement. He carried a drawing in his hands. Adrian smiled slightly and lifted him onto his lap. The paper showed 3 figures holding hands, Ethan in the middle, Maria and Adrian beside him. Above them, Ethan had written in large uneven letters, "My family." Adrian felt a lump in his throat. He hugged his son tightly. For a moment, he didn't care about business or pride. He just held the boy and whispered, "I love you, son." Ethan smiled and touched his father's cheek gently, then made a sign. Adrian didn't understand, but Maria entered just then and interpreted softly. He said, "I love you too." The words hit Adrian's heart like lightning. His eyes glistened. For the first time, he saw his son not as a burden or a reminder of pain, but as his greatest gift. After dinner, when Ethan was asleep, Adrian found himself standing outside Maria's room. He didn't know why he went there, maybe to thank her again, maybe to understand her better. But before he could knock, he heard her voice softly praying inside. "God, please protect Ethan," she whispered, "and help Mr. Cole forgive the past." Adrian froze. Forgive the past? He thought. What did she mean? He quietly stepped away, confusion twisting in his chest. The next morning he called his lawyer again. "That background check," he said. "Find out if she's related to anyone who's ever worked for me before. Any connection at all." "Of course, sir," the lawyer replied. 2 days later, the call came. "Mr. Cole," the lawyer said carefully, "I found something. Maria Santos. She's the sister of Daniel Santos. Do you remember that name?" Adrian's stomach dropped. "Daniel Santos," he repeated, his voice low. The memory came rushing back. The factory accident, the lawsuit, the man who claimed he was innocent, the case he dismissed without reading. His chest tightened. "He died, didn't he?" "Yes, sir," the lawyer confirmed. 2 years after losing his job. Adrian sank into his chair, his mind spinning. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. The woman who had healed his son's silence was the sister of the man whose life he had destroyed. That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maria's face, her kindness, her patience, her gentle love for Ethan. And then he saw her brother's file, a file he had once ignored, thinking it was just another worker's complaint. For the first time in years, Adrian felt guilt so strong it hurt to breathe. Down the hall, Maria sat by Ethan's bed, brushing his hair as he slept peacefully. She didn't know that her secret was no longer a secret. And in the quiet of the night, 2 hearts in the same house, one filled with guilt, the other with fear, waited for morning to bring the truth out into the light. Morning light filtered through the tall curtains of the Cole mansion, but the warmth that usually filled the halls was gone. The air felt tense, heavy with silence. Adrian sat in his office, staring blankly at the file on his desk, Maria's file. Her brother's name glared back at him in bold letters, Daniel Santos. He remembered the day years ago when the accident report had landed on his desk. He was younger then, proud and careless, too focused on growing his business to care about workers' problems. Daniel had begged for another chance, had written letters claiming innocence. Adrian never read them. He had fired him without a thought. To him, Daniel was just another name, another problem solved. Now the past had come back, not as an enemy, but as the kind woman who had saved his son. Adrian's heart twisted. How could fate be this cruel? He stood up and walked to the window, watching the garden where Ethan and Maria often played. Today Maria was there again, helping Ethan build a small tower with wooden blocks. She smiled as he clapped silently, celebrating his success. The sight should have made Adrian happy, but all he felt was guilt. He took a deep breath and called out, "Maria, can you come to my office, please?" Maria looked up, her smile fading when she saw his serious face through the window. She nodded and gently patted Ethan's shoulder, signing that she would be back soon. When she entered the office, Adrian was standing by the window, his back to her. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Maria asked softly. Adrian didn't turn around. His voice was calm but cold. "Yes, Maria, please sit." She obeyed, her heart pounding. She could sense something was wrong. Adrian finally turned, holding the file in his hand. "You've been with us for months now," he began. "You've taken care of my son, brought light into his life. For that I'm truly grateful." Maria blinked, uncertain how to respond. "It's my duty, sir. I care for him deeply." "I know you do," Adrian said. His voice hardened. "But tell me, Maria, why didn't you tell me who you really are?" Maria froze. Her breath caught in her throat. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Her fingers trembled. I don't understand," she whispered. Adrian dropped the file on the desk. The papers scattered across the surface. "Don't lie to me," he said quietly. "I know everything now. Daniel Santos, your brother, he worked for me. He was fired after the factory accident. He died not long after, didn't he?" Maria lowered her eyes. Her voice broke as she said, "Yes, sir." "He did." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but she held her voice steady. "Because I didn't come here to talk about the past. I came to take care of your son." Adrian slammed his fist lightly against the desk, not out of anger, but out of pain. "You came here because of revenge, didn't you?" he said sharply. "To punish me, to make me feel guilty." Maria stood up, shaking her head. "No, Mr. Cole, I came here because I wanted to forgive you." Her words hit him like thunder. He stared at her, speechless. Maria continued, tears running down her face. "When my brother died, I hated you. I blamed you for everything. But hatred doesn't heal anything. I wanted to understand what kind of man could destroy a family so easily. And when I met you, I saw it. You're not a monster. You're just a man who lost his way, just like I did. Adrian turned away, his chest heavy. You should have told me, he said quietly. You should have told me from the start. I couldn't, Maria said softly. Would you have hired me if I had? He didn't answer. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. I didn't come to hurt you, sir. I came to help your son, because no child deserves to grow up unloved. Not even the son of the man I once blamed for everything. Adrian's hands trembled. You had every reason to hate me, he whispered. I did, Maria replied. But when I met Ethan, I saw my brother in his eyes. Innocent, kind, full of silence. How could I hate you after that? The room went silent. Outside, the rain began to fall softly against the windows, like tears from the sky. Adrian finally turned toward her, his eyes filled with pain. Maria, I destroyed your brother's life. I can't change that. I can't fix what I've done. Maria shook her head gently. You can't change the past, sir. But you can change the future. Ethan needs you. Not your money, not your name, but your heart. Don't waste the second chance God gave you. Adrian's throat tightened. He looked down, ashamed. I don't deserve forgiveness, he murmured. Maria smiled faintly through her tears. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs peace. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Adrian sat down, covering his face with his hands. Years of guilt and pride came crashing down like a wave. Maria stood quietly watching him, her own tears falling freely. Finally, Adrian looked up. Maria, he said softly, I can't erase what I did to your brother, but I can promise you this. I'll never take another life for granted again, and I'll make sure Ethan grows up knowing what love really means. Maria nodded, her voice trembling. That's all I ever wanted. At that moment, the door opened quietly. Ethan stood there holding his teddy bear, his small face full of confusion. He looked at his father, then at Maria. Adrian quickly wiped his tears and knelt down. Come here, buddy. Ethan walked over and looked up at both of them. Maria smiled gently and signed to him that everything was fine. Ethan, still innocent and unaware of the storm that had just passed, wrapped his tiny arms around both of them. Adrian and Maria froze, then slowly hugged him back. In that silent embrace, years of pain, anger, and guilt melted away. It didn't matter who was rich or poor, guilty or innocent. All that mattered was that love had found its way back into the house that had once been filled only with silence. Outside, the rain stopped and sunlight broke through the clouds. The mansion, once cold and empty, finally felt like a home again. Days passed after the confrontation, but the air inside the Cole mansion had changed completely. What was once a house full of silence and distance was now a home filled with gentle warmth. Adrian had stopped spending his nights buried in business papers. Instead, he spent his evenings sitting with Ethan, learning sign language, trying to speak with his son in the only way he could. Maria continued her work quietly. She smiled often, but deep inside, her heart was still heavy. She was relieved that Adrian knew the truth, but she also feared what might come next. Would he still keep her there? Would she lose the boy she had grown to love like her own? One evening, Adrian found her in the garden watering the flowers with Ethan beside her. The sunset painted the sky with soft orange light, and Ethan laughed silently as Maria let water sprinkle over his hands. It was a picture of peace, something Adrian hadn't seen in years. He stepped closer and said, "You've changed this place, Maria." She turned, a little surprised. "I didn't do much, sir." Adrian smiled faintly. "You did everything. You healed this house." She looked down, hiding a blush. "It wasn't me, sir. It was love. It was Ethan." Adrian nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. But I want to do something, not just for him, but for you too." Maria frowned slightly. "For me?" "Yes," he said softly. "I've reopened the case about your brother. I spoke to the lawyers and found out the truth. Daniel wasn't responsible for that accident. The company's safety systems had failed. It was my mistake. I ignored it." Tears filled Maria's eyes instantly. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I did," Adrian said, "because I can't change the past, but I can make sure your brother's name is cleared. I'll also provide support to his family. It's the least I can do." Maria covered her mouth, her voice shaking. Thank you, Mr. Cole. I don't know what to say. He looked at her gently. Say nothing. Just know that I'm truly sorry. For the first time, Maria saw a new side of him, not the cold businessman she once hated, but a man capable of remorse and love. Her heart softened even more. That night, something incredible happened. Ethan had been drawing in his room while Maria read him a bedtime story. Adrian stood outside, watching through the half-open door. Maria's soft voice filled the air, calm and soothing. She read slowly, showing pictures as Ethan watched with wide eyes. When she finished, she smiled and signed, "Good night, Ethan." Ethan smiled, but then he did something neither of them expected. He opened his mouth and spoke. A soft, broken word came out, shaky but clear. "Mama." Maria froze. Her eyes widened, tears instantly spilling down her cheeks. She turned to Adrian, who stood at the door, his hand over his mouth in disbelief. Ethan looked at her again, smiling shyly. "Mama," he said once more, louder this time. Maria ran to him, kneeling by his bed. She hugged him tightly, sobbing into his shoulder. "Oh, Ethan," she cried, "you spoke. You really spoke." Adrian stepped inside, tears glistening in his eyes. He sat on the bed beside them, his voice trembling. "He's never said a word before," he whispered. Maria nodded, still holding Ethan. "It's a miracle," she said softly. "He found his voice through love." Ethan reached out his little hands and touched both of their faces, smiling as if he understood how special the moment was. Adrian took his son's hand and kissed it, his heart breaking open with joy. That night neither of them could sleep. Adrian sat by the window in his study, staring at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. He realized that sometimes life breaks you, only to rebuild you stronger. Maria stood outside on the balcony, looking up at the same sky. She whispered softly, "Daniel, your name is clear now, and this boy, he reminds me of you, kind, brave, full of hope." The next morning, news spread through the staff that young Ethan Cole, the deaf boy, had spoken his first word. Everyone was overjoyed. The house felt alive again, full of laughter and light. Later that day, Adrian invited Maria to the garden. The flowers were blooming, the air smelled fresh, and the sun shone bright. He looked at her seriously. "Maria, I've been thinking. Ethan doesn't just need a nanny. He needs a family." Maria looked surprised. "What do you mean, sir?" Adrian took a deep breath. "You've done more for him than anyone ever has. You've taught him to feel, to speak, to love. You've taught me the same. I know this might sound strange, but I can't imagine this house without you." Maria's heart pounded. "Mr. Cole?" He smiled gently. "Please call me Adrian." She hesitated, emotion flooding her eyes. "Adrian, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," he said softly. "Not just for Ethan, but for us." Maria looked at him, really looked, and saw not the powerful man she once feared, but the broken soul she had helped heal. She smiled through her tears. "I'll stay," she whispered. "For both of you." Adrian let out a deep breath of relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. The next few weeks passed like a dream. The mansion that once echoed with silence now burst with laughter, footsteps, and life. Ethan's voice, though still soft and sometimes shaky, was heard more often. Each new word he learned felt like a miracle, a small victory that made everyone smile. Adrian was a changed man. He spent less time in his office and more time in the garden, chasing his son, laughing, and sharing meals with Maria. For the first time in years, he felt something real, something money had never been able to buy, happiness. Ethan came running from the house, his small hands waving in excitement. He ran straight into Maria's arms and hugged her tightly. Then he looked up at his father and spoke again, this time clearer. "Papa," Adrian gasped, tears filling his eyes once more. He knelt beside his son, hugging him close. "Yes, my boy," he whispered. "Papa's here." Maria covered her mouth, crying softly, unable to believe what she had witnessed. Ethan, the boy who had lived in silence his whole life, had now spoken two of the most beautiful words, Mama and Papa. The three of them sat there in the sunlight, holding each other, surrounded by laughter, tears, and the sound of hope. But as perfect as it seemed, fate still had one final twist to reveal, something none of them saw coming. The next few weeks passed like a dream. The mansion that once echoed with silence now burst with laughter, footsteps, and life. Ethan's voice, though still soft and sometimes shaky, was heard more often. Each new word he learned felt like a miracle, a small victory that made everyone smile. Adrian was a changed man. He spent less time in his office and more time in the garden, chasing his son, laughing and sharing meals with Maria. For the first time in years, he felt something real. Something money had never been able to buy. Happiness. Maria, too, had changed. The shadows that once followed her had slowly faded. She still thought of her brother Daniel every night, whispering his name in prayer, but now her heart was light. She had found peace in the most unexpected place, inside the home of the man she once blamed for her pain. One quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the hills, Adrian called Maria to his office. But this time his voice was gentle, even cheerful. When she entered, she noticed a small box on the desk. Adrian smiled softly. "Sit down, Maria, I want to show you something." She sat, curious. Adrian opened the box and pulled out a silver bracelet, simple, elegant, with tiny letters engraved on the inside. He held it out to her. She read the words, "For the woman who gave us both our voice." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Cole, I can't accept this." "Oh, please," he said kindly. "It's not payment. It's gratitude. You gave me back my son. You gave me back my heart." Maria smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Before she could say more, Ethan ran into the room holding a small envelope. "Papa," he said proudly, showing off his new word. Adrian laughed, lifting him up. "You're getting better every day, my boy." Ethan grinned and handed the envelope to Maria. "Mama?" he said, pointing. Maria looked surprised. "For me?" Ethan nodded eagerly. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a small piece of paper, one of Ethan's drawings. It showed 3 people holding hands under a shining sun, just like before. But this time there was something new. Above their heads, in big, colorful letters, he had written, "My family forever." Maria couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged Ethan tightly, whispering, "Forever, my love, forever." Adrian smiled, his heart full. But deep inside he knew there was still one last thing he needed to do, to make peace not only with Maria, but with himself. That night, when the house was quiet, Adrian drove to the old cemetery outside the city. Rain had just stopped, and the air was cool. He walked slowly to a grave marked Daniel Santos. Kneeling down, he placed a bouquet of white lilies on the stone. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Daniel, I don't know if you can hear me, but I owe you everything. I destroyed your life once, but your sister saved mine. And your nephew. He speaks now. Because of her, because of you. I promise I'll take care of her and Ethan, always." He stayed there for a long while, the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. When he finally stood, the weight he had carried for years seemed lighter, as if Daniel himself had forgiven him. When he returned home, Maria was waiting by the door, her face pale with worry. "You're late," she said softly. "I was scared something happened." Adrian smiled tiredly. "I just went to say goodbye to an old ghost." She understood immediately. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were peaceful tears. "He would have forgiven you," she whispered. Adrian nodded. "I hope so." The following morning brought a surprise. A letter arrived at the mansion, an old one addressed to Mr. Adrian Cole. The ink had faded, the edges yellowed. The maid handed it to him curiously. Adrian opened it carefully and froze. The letter was from Daniel Santos, dated the week before the accident. His hands shook as he read, "Sir, I know there have been problems at the factory, but I want you to know, I've never blamed you. You gave me work when I had nothing. If something happens to me, please make sure my sister Maria is taken care of. She's all I have." Adrian's breath caught in his chest. His eyes blurred with tears. "He forgave me even before I wronged him," he whispered. He handed the letter to Maria. She read it slowly, then pressed it to her heart. "He always believed in goodness," she said softly. "Even when life was cruel." Adrian looked at her, his voice breaking. "And you brought that goodness back into this house." Maria shook her head gently. "No, Mr. Cole. Love did." Ethan came running into the room, laughing, carrying a tiny flower he'd picked from the garden. "Mama, Papa!" he shouted joyfully. Both of them turned toward him, and for a moment the world stood still. Adrian knelt down and lifted Ethan into his arms, his voice full of pride. "You said it perfectly, my boy. Ethan smiled brightly, placing the flower in Maria's hand. "Family," he said again, softly this time. Maria's eyes shone as she whispered, "Yes, family." Adrian wrapped his arm around both of them. "Forever," he added. The three of them stood together, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, washing the room in gold. It was the same house that once knew only sorrow, now glowing with life, laughter, and love. And somewhere beyond the reach of time, Daniel Santos smiled, because forgiveness had finally done what hate never could. It had made broken hearts whole again. Months passed, and the Cole mansion became a place full of love and laughter. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried the soft sound of a child's voice and the gentle hum of happiness. Ethan was growing stronger every day. He spoke more clearly, his words small but powerful. Every time he called out Mama or Papa, Adrian and Maria's eyes filled with pride and tears. He no longer feared the world. He faced it with a smile. Guided by the love that surrounded him, Adrian, once a man of numbers and power, now spent his mornings making breakfast with Ethan and Maria, laughing when the toast burned or milk spilled. His heart had changed completely. He often said, "Money built this house, but love made it a home." Maria continued to care for Ethan, but now she was no longer just his nanny. She was part of the family, the heart that held them together. She had forgiven the man who once ruined her life, and in that forgiveness she found peace beyond measure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adrian stood beside Maria on the balcony. The golden light painted their faces as Ethan played in the garden below, chasing butterflies. Adrian said softly, "You know, I used to think my life ended the day my wife died, but now I see it was only beginning. You and Ethan, you gave me a second chance." Maria smiled gently. "Life always gives second chances, Mr. Cole. Only if we're brave enough to take them." He turned to her, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you, Maria, for forgiving me, for saving my son, for saving me." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "We saved each other." Down in the garden, Ethan looked up at them and waved happily. "Mama, Papa!" he called, his voice echoing through the soft evening air. Both of them laughed and waved back, hearts full. As the last rays of sunlight touched the mansion, it no longer looked like a symbol of wealth or pride. It looked like what it had always longed to be, a home built not from gold but from grace, forgiveness, and love that healed everything it touched.